Okay, we're on a break. So, Ross, Gene, we're listening to a crime scene detective testify. The prosecution, Gene, has been pretty methodical about going in a time order with regard to the 911 call, the first responder, the officer's body cam video, and now the crime scene detective. So they're taking it in a logical order, which is a way I typically like to present a case if I can. What are your thoughts?
That's the perfect way to do it. You want to do it in a timeline. So jurors, I assume jurors are taking notes, and jurors like to have that timeline to understand the case. Even if the witnesses aren't explosive, there's no confession, just to give context to exactly what happened. It's very important testimony. I wouldn't say it's the sine qua non of the case, but it's something you should present.
Well, Gene Rossi, man, you're throwing out those Latin terms, boy. You got it all. I can't tell you. This is why I love having guys like Ross and Gene on. These guys are real pros, and you get Latin, you get it all. Hey, listen, guys, we're going to do a little switch here, go to Top Crimes. We'll come back with more great analysis from Ross and Gene.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Authorities in Louisiana linked a death row inmate in Texas to a 19-year-old cold case murder thanks to advancements in DNA technology. The victim, 19-year-old Casey Federer, was found dead from a gunshot wound in her Park Boulevard apartment in September of 1999. A glove was left in the apartment, and Baton Rouge authorities were recently able to link it to 49-year-old Travis Green, a death row inmate in Texas. Green was convicted and sentenced to death in 2001 for the rape and murder of another 19-year-old woman just 2 weeks before Federer's killing. Green now faces charges of first-degree murder and aggravated burglary. An officer in Florida is coming under fire after video surfaced of the officer punching a 14-year-old girl on her side while she was down on the ground. Authorities were responding to a call of a group of teens allegedly harassing customers at the Coral Square Mall in Coral Springs. The teens were banned from the mall, but returned and continued to harass customers, allegedly pushing over a 5-year-old girl before police intervened.
Why you hitting her? She can't do it! She can't do that! Her hand's underneath her!
The Coral Springs Police Department defended its officers' actions as appropriate use of force. The unidentified teen now faces 3 separate charges. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, welcome back. Hey, Gene, Ross, this case with the cop. Now, I know we're only seeing a snippet of this video. 14-year-old girl, hands underneath her body. 2 officers there you can see right now. One is not striking, the other one is. Gene, let me flip to you real quick. I mean, you've trained police officers and prosecutors. What's your first thoughts when you see something like this?
Here's what I used to tell the officers. Assume everything you do is being videoed. And assume that the video could get on the front page of a TV show or in a newspaper. This is not an action that I would approve of. The person's in the prone position. You have an officer helping out. The officer didn't need to do that with his left hand. He didn't need to do that.
Ross, what do you think?
I mean, it's very hard with these cases because you're losing the context. You're losing what happened before. But it's very tough. You know, you hope that with enough of these videos surfacing and enough of these cases being charged and enough of these disciplinary actions that there'll actually be some sort of institutional change and better training so that we don't have to see these every week.
Yeah, and the department, as I understand it, is relatively supporting the officer, at least at this point in time, and we don't know about what occurred prior to this, and I'm told that there may have been a potential for an assault afterwards with the officers. And again, they're trying to get compliance and putting your arms, I'm playing devil's advocate here, putting your arms underneath your body when the officer's trying to handcuff you is resistance, is it not, Gene?
It is, but what I didn't I didn't see any commands by the officer using his left jab. If he repeatedly say, please, I have to arrest you, I'm going to cuff you, stop resisting, stop resisting. If you have 4 or 5 commands and then they don't respond, then you can use reasonable force. Right. I didn't see that, but I got to see the whole tape.
I agree completely. It's all in the context of the tape. We will find out more about this case, I am sure. But right now, we are in the Kristopher Love case. This case is going to be a fascinating, twisted tale of conspiracy murder for hire. Let's go to a clip of Larry Spawn, who is a security officer, and a video that was played earlier today. All right, so that clip is basically showing what the state is alleging the getaway vehicle is in the case. So you have this massive conspiracy, if you will, amongst these people, but a lot of evidence that the police collected in support of the case. Gene, I want to talk to you about death penalty litigation. As a death penalty prosecutor myself, the murder for hire aggravating factor is probably one of the best you can get in front of a jury. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Here's why. When you have a murder for hire, the amount of premeditation that is involved, you're thinking about killing somebody, you're taking a step to do it, you're eliciting others, you're paying another person to do your dirty work. There's something incredibly egregious and cowardly about that is incredibly bad for a defendant who's facing the death penalty. I do got to say this. I think Brenda Delgado is not facing a death penalty, even though it is capital murder, because when Mexico allowed her to come back into our country, they got an agreement that Dallas County would not ask for the death penalty.
Yeah, Ross, actually, you were bringing that point up offline. There's some conflict there. We'll get our producers to straighten that out as whether or not Delgado's facing the death penalty here. Love is. And, she's the one who orchestrated, this and is the mastermind. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised in a way sometimes that you see Love as a defendant and not potentially as a cooperator. He could have broken this case apart if he was a cooperator, and being able to strike a deal to take the death penalty off the table is often a very powerful motivator for defendants.
Yeah, definitely. And so, guys, so far, prosecution's case is going in pretty clean. Ross, if you were defending this case right now, you see the lawyers not asking a lot of questions. I think strategically a good move. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think at this point in the case there's a lot to ask. These were a series of people who really have no motive to testify falsely or to exaggerate anything. I would have done some behind-the-scenes work here to get those pictures down from behind the witness. I would have tried to limit the amount of time that the jury could have been exposed to the pictures of the victim laying on the ground next to that car to kind of limit the prejudice. But I agree with the defense lawyers here that there's just not a lot of harsh questioning that you could put to gain ground here.
Gene, real quick, what do you think as a defense attorney? Put your defense cap on here for a minute, because we're always, I think, prosecutors in our DNA. What are your thoughts about how to defend this case right now?
Well, that would be a tough one. I think if I'm defending Love, all I can do is just try to establish that maybe he wasn't there, that Delgado was the one who masterminded it. You have that getaway driver, the female Crystal. Try to point the finger at either Crystal or Brenda and hope that the jury has some reasonable doubt, or they find him guilty, but they're not confident that he should get the death penalty.
Gene, you hit exactly where I was going to go with this. When you have evidence like this, when you have motive, when you have witnesses, when the defendant gives a confession, you got to fall on the mercy just to try to save the life of this guy. That's my thought as to where the defense is going to go. We'll see. We got to go to a break. We'll be back on the other end with our two great guests. Okay, welcome back. That is Tammy Moore on the witness stand, fighting for her life, charged with murder, the prosecutor asking questions. Gene, Ross, this went on for a while, and there was a lot of contentiousness back and forth between Tammy and the prosecutor. Ross, I'll go to you first. Just in 15 seconds or less, was this testimony effective? Did it advance the ball in Tammy Moore's favor, or did she go backwards?
Absolutely went backwards. I'm shocked at this decision here. I think that at the close of the prosecution's case, the defendant was way ahead, and this totally bucks conventional wisdom. Don't put the defendant on the stand. Don't make this about her likability, her credibility. I think they went way backwards with this testimony.
Gene Rossi, what do you think?
I agree with Ross, but here's the thing. Did Tammy want to take the stand?
Well, before we get into that, we're going to get into that in a second, but do you think that she assisted herself, or did she talk herself into a conviction?
I think she may have talked herself into a conviction because she was a little snarky at first and in the beginning last week, and then I noticed a little bit here. The prosecutor, who has a great accent, by the way, she is getting under the defendant's skin. and that's not a good thing.
Okay, now, getting to the point that we've been kind of talking about behind the scenes, the defendant deciding to take the stand or not take the stand. Guys, the defense opened up that she would take the stand, which I have never done, and I think is a risky move. Ross, do you think that that was a good idea to commit to that in the beginning of the case? And if you decide not to in the middle of the case, what do you do to get out of that?
Well, it's a terrible idea to do it. You know, number one, it's a defendant's decision, well counseled by a lawyer about whether they're going to take the stand or not. But you don't make that commitment, you don't make a promise at opening statement that you may have to walk back. Because if you're way ahead, if the prosecution has not proven its case at the end of the prosecution's case, there's no reason for you to put up the defendant there. But he walked himself into a position where he made a promise. What he could do to get out of it is a closing statements. He could have stood up and said, listen, I promised you that you'd see from the defendant's own words here, and you'd hear the defendant's own words, but the way that these prosecutors tried to prove the case, there's no evidence here, and my client has no reason to testify, so she's not going to.
Gene, what do you think about that? Would you, have you seen it done, and would you ever open up and say the defendant's going to take the stand in the opening?
I have seen it done where they do promise that the defendant's going to take the stand, and then the defendant doesn't take the stand, and what the judge reminds the jury during instructions and what the defense attorney reminds the jury is that we didn't have to put on a case. And what I said, what is said in opening and closing is not evidence.
Okay, guys, real quick, I want to ask you this question. If you were in a scenario where you are telling your client not to take the stand, it's a circumstantial case. The state has not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. You can only talk yourself into it, and you're not going to be a good witness. What do you do? Of course, the client makes the ultimate call to cover yourself as a lawyer when things go sideways and squirrely to avoid the ineffective assistance of counsel down the line. Do you go on the record with it because there's confidentiality between you and your client? How do you document that to protect yourself, Gene?
I've seen it done two ways. If the defendant wants to take the stand, Bob, and the defense attorney obviously says don't, what I have seen, the jury's out of the room. The judge will have a incredibly powerful, detailed colloquy with the defendant and kind of subtly bring out that the advice was you don't take the stand. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is the judge has a sidebar, asks permission to just speak with counsel and the defendant without the prosecutor there. I knew what that was going to be about. I said, go for it. Because then under seal, you have a colloquy among the judge, the defendant, and defense counsel, and it's there for the record, so you don't have this petition for habeas corpus based on ineffective assistance.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, you know, and you always got to be careful, though. I mean, when you're trying to reveal or you're revealing a client confidence, it's always a sticky matter, but you also got to protect the record as well. It's difficult. Tammy Moore made the decision. We'd always love to know what the backstory to that was. Maybe someday we'll find out, but I guess both of my guests and myself feel she didn't help herself. She hurt her cause. But we're going to go to a break, and we'll be back on the other end. We got a lot going on. Stay tuned and get into the chat room.